I beg you to try it, Patricio.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricio. You dare once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here. And we have a really, really important show. I know I say that a lot, but I have a bee in my bonnet, as they say, over the universities in Canada who are demanding, in fact, mandating a booster for healthy students. Western University is doing that. U of T is doing it for the students in residence. And my question is, what the hell are they thinking? How dare the aging, I'm assuming it's the tenured profs who have a lot of pull. I can't prove that, but there's some discussion about it. How dare they use these kids as human shields? This is so wrong. The upside of it is that these wonderful students, finally, they have found their backbone. I am so happy about this because they are fighting back and they're winning. They're winning a lot of public support on this. Look at the vaccines are not preventing transmission. Therefore, vaccinating the students is not going to protect the teachers who are clearly full of anxiety about COVID-19. It's not going to protect them from getting sick anyway. It's not. That is not where we are with vaccines right now. And if the profs at Western, one of the most august schools in the country, cannot figure out that there is a logical fallacy in what they are doing, then they shouldn't be teaching. And if they have figured out that this idea is wrong-headed and they're prepared to risk the health of students through vaccine injury, anyway, they also shouldn't be teaching. There is literally no argument they can be making that justifies forcing, especially booster doses, which is when the data shows that's when things get really dicey, especially for young people. If they are mandating this knowing they're going to cause harm, they should all be fired. I'm sorry, that might seem like hyperbole, but that's how I'm feeling today. I've been stewing about this for a couple of days. So we are absolutely gifted today because we have Kendra Hancock on. She is one of the organizers of this student pushback. Wow, is she ever something. Completely restored my faith in our young people. She's smart. She's courageous. She's pushing back really hard. And folks, they are getting traction. We must support them with every fiber of our beings, regardless of where you stand on vaccines. The science is now clear, absolutely clear, that young people, especially young men, have an elevated risk of myocarditis. And if they force these vaccines on the student body at Western U, that body is large enough, for sure there will be people who get myocarditis as a direct result of this mandate. How do they live with that? Again, if they don't know it, they shouldn't be teaching. And if they don't know that vaccines are not preventing the transmission of the virus, they also shouldn't be teaching. I mean, they don't have a leg to stand on. But here is something we all need to celebrate about this. The kids are fighting back. Hooray. There's a big event there tomorrow. So if you're in the area or want to drive out there, Kendra will talk about that at the end of the interview you're about to hear. So go and support them. I know Julie Panesi is going. Of course she is. She was an ethics prof there who refused a mandate, as well as you know. She's been on the show. She's been around a lot. She's really great and shows up on all the big issues. And there will be other people there too. Matt Strauss, who I admire, medical officer of health, who has been super courageous and not towing the narrative line. He goes where the data takes him, so he's going out to support them too. That is wonderful. What is not so great about this is that it exposes the bankruptcy of thinking among our elite academies, like at Western University. What are they thinking? You know, we went through 2 years of teachers' unions destroying the lives of children through school closures and lockdowns that should never have happened. Sweden was wide open most of that time. And their numbers are really good. So these things, A, they didn't work. B, they were desperately dangerous for children. And C, they were pushed by the teachers' union, who were so captured by their own fear, and I'm just going to say it, selfishness, that they have done some very, very serious damage to a generation of children. I've done a bunch of shows on it. I don't need to repeat it right now, but you know that it's true. And the data proves it. So here we are at the university level. They're doing the same thing. They are risking the health of students because of their own fear. The vaccines do not do what they are suggesting with these mandates that they do. So this is not a good look. This is absolutely not a good look. It has been a bit of a mystery about who was actually behind demanding the vaccine. So Brian Lilly at the Toronto Sun suggests that this edict that you have to be boosted to attend Western University in the fall came from faculty members, driven by demands from faculty members rather than any basis in public health. And you know why we know that's true? Because there is no basis in public health for it, right? So he reports that he had that information. I also, by the way, heard the same thing from a source. So he, I'm sure, is correct in that. I was contacted by email by someone from Western. While the provincial government doesn't run these schools directly, they do regulate them and provide significant funding each year. Asked to react to the announcements by schools, Scott Clark, a spokesman for colleges and university minister Jill Dunlop, said the province want to see schools follow the advice of Dr. Kieran Moore, Ontario's chief medical officer. He said it shouldn't be mandatory. That was his thing. So what happens in these circumstances, we've seen this over and over in the last couple of years, is that people who are frightened and who want to impose this sort of COVID theater on people will cherry pick, right? They love an expert until the expert doesn't agree with them anymore, and then they go and they find somebody else. But the bottom line is the science and the data do not support what they are trying to do. And if all this does is assuage their fear, that is not a good enough reason to put students at risk. If they want to take a risk with the vaccine and risk their own health with an adverse reaction, that's cool. But given that they don't stop transmission, given that they do cause myocarditis in young people and other things too, this cannot happen. Of nearly 53,000 people hospitalized in Ontario due to COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic, just 487 of them were aged 12 to 19. 4,000 were aged 20 to 39. But here's the rub. Many of those were people admitted for other reasons and tested positive once admitted. Just 1% of the 14,000 COVID deaths registered in Ontario were in people under the age of 40. Many of those were also people who died of other causes but were infected at the time of death. So here we go. Why can we, the journalists and the podcasters, find this data? And yet the staff, the faculty at Western University are quaking in their boots. This is not good, people. This is not good. And I have a bee in my bonnet, and you should have a bee in your bonnet too, on behalf of these wonderful kids who shouldn't need to take a booster shot in order to attend school. They've paid enough in the last 2 years through crazy policy that was inhumane towards students. They've paid enough. We're not doing this anymore. So our guest today, as I said, we have Kendra Hancock, who's one of the students who got this ball rolling, and also Bruce Pardy. He's a lawyer, executive director of the Rights Probe, and professor of law at Queen's. He was one of the lawyers on the complaint filed with the Canadian Judicial Council about the Freedom Convoy. There was some big proceeding about a judge. Anyway, so he's quite active. He's very thoughtful too. I like the way he thinks. He's a very interesting guy. So he's coming up too. Western is ranked as one of Canada's leading research-intensive universities with annual funding in excess of $240 million and has a history of excellence in fundamental and applied discovery. So Frederick Banting in 1920 was teaching at Western. He woke from an agitated night's sleep and wrote the initial words that led to insulin's discovery. So, Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine. Wow, that's a really august history. So figure out COVID, you guys. If that's actually your background, which it is, then you're not in keeping with that history by behaving the way you are now. And I'm telling you, history will not be kind. So let's talk for a minute about I'm going to do my little pitch for you now. So we are supported by Patreon and PayPal and on Substack too. And that is in order to keep the lights on around here so we can keep doing the work that we are doing. It's very time consuming and very research based. I also do write on Substack, and much of the stuff you hear on the show is alluded to in various Substack articles. So if you are a PayPal supporter and a patron or a Patreon supporter, we have already subscribed you to Substack. There's a lot of interesting discussion going on over there, and you are able to take part in that even if you're not a paid subscriber because you paid at Patreon or PayPal. So do take advantage of that. I've said before we're moving over to Substack because it's an actual free speech platform, and Patreon is not, and PayPal is, but only some of the time. I want to also bring to your attention something I'm doing. At the end of October, I'm going to be appearing at the Free Speech in Medicine and Science conference. Registration's open now. Please come out and see us. This is really important. It's the first annual Free Speech in Medicine and Science conference, October 28th to 30th, 2022 in beautiful Baddock, Nova Scotia. And it's being put on by Chris Milburn, who's been on the show. He's the doctor who was on talking about the death of Kai Matthews. He's a very brave guy, paid a bit of a price as an emergency physician for speaking out, and his wife, Julie Kerwin, who I believe is a psychiatrist. They've practiced medicine for over 20 years. They're passionate advocates for free speech and open scientific inquiry. Their experiences with censorship and the stifling of scientific debate during the time of COVID prompted this initiative. The mission of Free Speech in Medicine and Science is to connect individuals who believe in scientific integrity in the face of attempts to politicize and subvert scientific discourse. You can read their thoughts on their Substack, which is, I think, Parodocs, P-A-I-R-O-D-O-C-S. And then some of the great people who are coming to speak. My old friend, Jay Bhattacharya, one of the signatories to the Great Barrington Declaration. They were right and everybody else was wrong. So I guess I shouldn't put it that way, but we knew it at the time, didn't we? We all knew focus protection was the way to go. Anyway, Jay Bhattacharya will be there. He now is a senior scholar at the Brownstone Institute, health economist, physician epidemiologist, Stanford professor. And then Francis Christian, surgeon, poet, and medical humanities scholar who got in hot water for urging debate and caution around childhood vaccines out in Saskatchewan. He's a brilliant guy. I love him. Stanley Goldfarb, who has written a book about woke medicine, and which means anti-free speech medicine, doesn't it? He has a website, donoharmmedicine.org. He's going to either be there or be coming in on Zoom. I can't remember. And Bruce Pardy, who's on the show today, expert in Canadian civil liberties, particularly free speech in medicine and science. And then me, of course, you know who I am, and Sean Watley, practicing physician, author, past president of the Ontario Medical Association, and more to come. So if you can make it, please go to the Free Speech in Medicine and Science website and sign up and come and see us. And I promise I'll make time to speak to everybody who comes. I'll give you a couple minutes because I love meeting our listeners. It's really an important and satisfying part of this. So I guess that's it for the pitch, but I also just want to say too, we have a merch store. Please go there. Whatever you buy helps the show. We still have trucker merch, which is still really popular as it should be. We have our famous no hat, which is about not complying and being obedient to everything we're told to do. And it's quite good. It's all tasteful. The products, they look nice. It's stuff that I wear myself. So go take a look at it. And if you like it, pick something up. And it helps us. So let's move on to the vaccine story at Western University. I want to just talk to you a little bit about the science here, okay? And the big moment, really, I mean, look, myocarditis has been blinking red. No one disputes that. We've talked about it on the show a lot. There was a Thailand study that really was very devastating. And of course, the fact checkers moved in to try to say, well, it's not a third of people, it's only 1 in 6. I don't know, some crazy thing they did, but it's bad. So Vinay Prasad, who's a highly regarded guy, likes vaccines generally more than I do, but even he is saying no, 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 right? He says taking safety signals seriously is imperative. The US CDC and others have failed to do that, including our health protection branch and the people who are supporting any mandates of young people with this product for a variety of reasons, but especially for boosters, right? When it comes to young men, both past and present, the story is complicated and nuanced. As early as February 2021, we had reports from Israel that young men were experiencing myocarditis. That's really when it started. And inflammation of the wall of the heart after COVID-19 vaccine administration. Preliminary figures varied, but reports placed it in the 1 in 3,000 to 1 in 5,000 ballpark. Now that has changed dramatically. And what he says is instead of taking any actions that were suggested at the time to mitigate the use of these products in the vulnerable group, which is young people, instead of taking any of these actions, which we suggested at the time, Vinay says, the public health community downplayed, gaslighted, and misled about the concern. Initially, the CDC director said, in what must have been incorrect, we have not seen a signal, and we've actually looked intentionally for the signal in over 200 million doses we've given. Imagine that, just dead wrong, and proven dead wrong even more as time goes on. And let's also remember that people who were reporting this were censored and deplatformed. That's still happening, by the way. Some experts chose to report rates of myocarditis among all recipients, lumping in 20-year-old men with 80-year-old women. That's what they do. That's so dishonest. This is as colossally stupid as combining men and women to report on ovarian cancer statistics, right? So this Thailand study is really blinking red. And I just want to read something. He quotes a guy named Anish Koka, who's been on my show. He was my first COVID guest. He's a cardiologist in Philadelphia. I can assure you, and the mostly ER doctor contingent on Twitter that braves about myocarditis, mild myocarditis, that there are no cardiologists who want to see their child have a cardiac troponin that is 2 times normal or 40 times normal after administration of some therapeutic. That's a marker, right? What actually does one to do with an adolescent with a troponin that is 2 times normal, that is asymptomatic? Given the theoretical risk of malignant cardiac arrhythmias, I would imagine most cardiologists would follow the current guidelines for myocarditis and advise against strenuous cardiac activity for some months. Sudden cardiac activity in young athletes sudden cardiac death in young athletes is obviously a fearsome complication that is very real, and it is likely some proportion of sudden cardiac death is from subclinical myocarditis, right? So And they go on, he goes on, Vinay Prasad goes on to say boosters should not be mandated without robust evidence of benefit. And we don't have that. The other person I just want to weigh in from is Deanna McLeod, who was on our show. Let me just find what she wrote to us about this problem. I trust her very much. She is absolutely terrific at going through data. Here we go. So this came from Deanna McLeod. She is a former pharmaceutical industry expert, clinical trials expert, data expert. She appeared on my show a couple of weeks ago talking about the data surrounding vaccines. And here's what she is saying about this. I am not sure that you are aware of this, but both the University of Toronto and U Western have announced that they will be back to mandating COVID-19 shots. I believe for the University of Toronto, they will mandate it for students in residence and Western for everyone on campus. This is very surprising in light of the recently updated CDC guidance that states that they will no longer distinguish based on vaccination status, given that COVID-19 current vaccines do not halt transmission or prevent infection. I wondered what might be informing their position. Could it be that as a premier medical institutions, they are out of date or have other influencers, or do they have other influences at play? I decided to do a bit of digging, and after a brief search, found that Western has received up to $52 million in funding from the federal government for COVID-19 projects, and that the University of Toronto recently entered into a partnership with Moderna regarding mRNA research, and that U of T has launched something called Emerging and Pandemic Infections Consortium, EPIC, which aims to, in quotes, connect researchers from U of T and its partner hospitals with industry and government agencies in a manner that strengthens Canada's capacity to respond to infectious diseases, and is actually working with member partners, which include pharmaceutical companies. She's a Hawkeye. I wonder whether institutional, financial, and research interests are now overshadowing the best interests of students and teachers. Deanna McLeod, Principal and Lead Strategist, Kaleidoscope Strategic, Inc. So that was an email she sent me. So let's get down to it. You are absolutely going to love Kendra Hancock. She's our first guest. She is leading the charge of students at Western University. And also we have Bruce Pardy, our legal scholar and defender of freedom and free thought in this country. He is also really something. So we're going to start with Kendra, and then we'll go to Bruce Pardy. So here we go. Hi, Kendra. How are you?
Hi, good, thank you. And you?
I'm great, thanks. I must say I'm even super great because all of us oldsters who've been duking it out on some of the preposterous, absurd, and inhumane COVID-19 policies have been waiting for university students to find their voice on this. And you have, and I have to tell you, it's very uplifting for me to see this happening. I'm extremely, extremely proud of you. Having a kid who went to uni during all of COVID at Dalhousie and had a really rough time. So thank you for finding your voice.
Amen, Kendra. Well done. Good. I'm really glad you've taken the bull by the horns this time. Well
Thank
done.
you so much. Yeah, it's been really exciting to see the support from everywhere, and I'd say it was a bit unexpected considering the way it's played out in the last couple of years. But hey, we're ready to go with it. So.
And just in keeping with that thought for a minute, why do you think it did take so long for young people to find their voice? I know the pushback on anybody who spoke up was fierce and unfair and certainly ad hominem. Was that the reason why you guys were maybe a little bit late to the party, as we say?
Well, I personally, I tried to speak out a bit last year as I was going through the process of technically getting kicked out, and going through what I thought was absolutely an immoral, awful, forced situation. And it didn't quite take, because I would say, students just weren't ready. The backlash was vicious. The people who were outspoken were not open to hearing other sides of things. So I'd say a lot of people who might have been sympathetic were shut down. But this year, the timing's better. This is great to see, and I think students have just had enough, because last year, it was conditional. Things were still maybe a little fresh. Students thought, okay, if I cooperate, if I do this one thing, my life will resume, freedom will be restored, and I'll be able to move forward with my life. And that didn't quite happen. And now we're adding new conditions to that agreement. And I think people see through it. They see that this is not going to be the end. This is just the beginning if they comply.
What are you studying, Kendra? You could be a lawyer. What's smart? Yeah.
I think I've heard that from my parents always growing up, and I'm always disappointed in that way. I just finished up my bachelor's at Huron at Western, and I'm supposed to be heading into a grad program at Western this year for journalism and communications.
Oh, well, so you're good, a critical thinker in journalism. We need more of that. Maybe we'll get you running the CBC in 5 years, because we certainly need someone like you.
Maybe if they're still funded by then.
Yeah, if they're still funded. Yeah, not if I had my say, but I don't. Let me just ask you about something you said, which is that you were technically getting kicked out. What does that mean?
Yeah, so it was a very long, I'd say arduous process. Technically, I was kicked out from Huron, but I was able to continue my studies on a letter of permission through an online outside of province university. So I was able to get my credits to finish my degree, but I was kicked out. I received 3 trespass notices throughout that process. And yeah, I was kind of put through the ringer.
But sorry, is this because you were unvaccinated? Is that why? Or
yes.
Why? Yes. So not that it's anybody's business if you were vaccinated or not. I only ask that because it makes your narrative make sense then, that you were punished last year for holding the line, right?
Yes. So I submitted for an exemption, which was denied. I submitted an appeal. It was denied. That happened to a lot of students. I mean, we've heard from so many students who have genuine medical issues and had their doctors sign off on it, or weren't able to get their doctors to sign off on it. And these exemptions were denied. So people who have health issues weren't able to come. People with genuine religious convictions or moral convictions were not able to join the university last year.
Yeah, no, we know that. I'll get to what's happening right now in a minute, but I'm fascinated by you. I mean, you're really something. What is your view now that you are seeing the way the world can really work when it's kind of off kilter, right? Like this, for someone who's awake like you are around obviously the science of this thing, and yet seeing how many people you are taught to respect and indeed learn from have it wrong, what has that done to your personal like worldview now?
Mm-hmm. I'd say in terms of academia, it's distorted it. I think I've always, I don't know, maybe it's just how I was raised. My parents, I'm really grateful, but I was always taught to question everything. So even going to university and being excited to hear from, these professors who were supposed to be established and know what's going on, I've always been taught to question what they say. And, I found some, I've learned some great things, but also last year, while I was in the process of being kicked out, but being allowed to stay on university campus for the first semester, I mean, listening to professors in lecture go on and on about how wrong the people who weren't getting the vaccine were and how immoral and how terrible. And it really became this bashing sort of dynamic where since the unvaccinated were supposedly not involved, they became the group to target. And seeing that on such a scale of people are paying to be taught this definitely kind of shattered the worldview, I'd say.
Did you try and argue back? And if you did try to argue or debate, I suppose is a better word, what was the outcome?
Um, I'd say I did try to speak out here and there. You had to be really wary because I was definitely sort of scared of certain students in my class knowing about my situation, because in those kind of conversations that would erupt in class, you would get some very vocal, almost sort of borderline threatening tones. So for me to then speak up while I was trying to go through everything else, while I was working a 30-hour job on top of studies, it was just, I had to pick my battles, even though it, pained me sometimes to be on the quieter side.
So I'm going to make an offer to you right now. If you should ever want to, I'm going to let you host this program for
Oh,
an episode. That is topic of your choice. I want to give you a chance to come on here and have my pretty substantial audience experience someone who is as remarkable as you. So let me know, and I will hand you the reins one week to do a show of your choice. Okay?
wow. Yeah, that's a big offer. I might have to take you up on that.
No, I wish you would. Bruce, what do you, this kind of thing? I mean, I feel a bit weepy listening to her. What's your reaction?
This has been a watershed kind of events. And as Kendra alludes to, a lot of people have found out in a very abrupt way how the world really works, as opposed to the way they thought it might work or the way it was presented to them in academia. So, ironically, in a way, if you can put it this way, if there's any silver lining to this, that it might be that people have actually had a real education, a real abrupt education in their real lives about what really happens and who has the reins and who gets to say, and all of those niceties that you encounter in classrooms are not always true.
Yeah. And, I think for me, the thing too is that I have a kid, as I said, at uni, and I have an older kid, much older kid. There's 17 years difference in the two of them. And when I started being skeptical of COVID policy, they both thought I was nuts. And I mean, I may be nuts, but I'm not nuts about COVID policy. It came from my background as a serious science investigative reporter for CBC. That's my background, Kendra, in case you didn't know that. But now they're coming along, especially the one who was at uni, who said to me when they reinstituted remote learning at Dalhousie, he said, "Mom, I'm worried some of my friends are going to kill themselves." Like he literally dropped to his knees in my office and said, "Are they really again?" Like nobody thought they would do it. So what I'm getting at is, do you think that it is the social media feed curation that has impeded young people's ability to grasp, and not you, but others, to grasp this sooner? They seemed indoctrinated at the beginning of this, and I'm like, hey, you guys are the ones who are supposed to be questioning authority, and they were all running around with, "I'm so glad I got boosted, I'm on Team Pfizer" banners on their social media. Do you think social media is one of the reasons this took so long?
Absolutely. I have a memory of sitting with one of my friends who has actually some of her own health issues. So she was pretty worried about COVID. And this is, I think, heading into, it was around like Christmas time where Joe Biden was getting the first dose of vaccines and everybody was so excited because, at that point we were thinking COVID was very severe, very dangerous. And this was kind of the end of the road. This was the light at the end of the tunnel. And I remember sitting with my friend who was very COVID conscious, very worried about it, and had some of her health issues to be worried about. And her and I discussed, and she goes, "Yeah, I don't think I'll get the vaccine. It makes more sense to give it to, elderly populations or those who are immunocompromised. Yeah. And I probably won't get it." To flash forward to a year later, and this friend and so many others being ones who are boastful online on social media about their doses, and I'd say diminishing those who disagreed and weren't going to make that choice for themselves.
Yeah, it really happened very quickly. So let's move on to where we stand today. So when did you learn that not only were they not relaxing vax mandates, but they were actually upping the ante at Western?
It's actually kind of funny. This summer, I've been able to be a normal person with some hope on the horizon. Yeah. I was worried about buying an office desk for my room at my new lease and filling out scholarship applications. So I was filling out a scholarship essay when I got the news. I was super excited about the essay. It was something I was really passionate about sports journalism. And I looked down at my phone and went, oh no. And then just like that, everything had to be pushed aside. And I mean, dreams were kind of instantly crushed, but I mobilized because it's not just me who's in this situation. I have to look out for all the other Western students who are in the same position.
And what was your response when you learned how they were justifying it? You know, when you read what they say, oh, it's the kind of platitudes, we're keeping the campus safe and blah, blah, blah. There's no data driving, at least not that they're talking about. There's no data driving the decision. It's the kind of this more of the same old, right? What was your response when they underpinned the decision with more, whatever that is, mantra?
Absolutely. I would say I wasn't super shocked. I've been at Huron at Western, so I've been a part of the community for 4 years. And I'd say that's sort of the go-to is the mantras of, you know, careful wording and everything. I have a communications background, so I know the thought that goes into those sort of messaging. And yeah, it was disappointing but unexpected. And that's sort of the first thing I did was I had a copy of the old policy from last year saved on my computer just in case it went disappearing or anything like that. So I compared it directly to the new one. And the new policy still says it's the decision was made because of the Middlesex London Health Unit recommendation and the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Despite those two groups not recommending this, not mandating this, encouraging it, sure, but not forcing it.
What do you think's really going on? Is it just a bunch of old people who are nervous about themselves? Is that what you think it is? Because that's what I think it is.
You know, I'm not too sure. There's been a few rumors going around about faculty negotiation contracts and some outside funding. I obviously can't, you know, speak to any of that, but something else has to be going on if it's not health. I don't know if they truly believe it's about health anymore, and that's how students feel. The trust in the institution is gone, and it's only going to get worse if they don't reverse this. So we need to know what the reasoning is, and it can't just be here's a doctor who agrees with us. It needs we need to see the data that shows that people with less than 3 doses, less than 2, less than 1, are a physical threat to others on campus.
Yeah, see, you're asking questions the legacy media still isn't asking, so bravo to you. And how has the rest of the student body that you know of responded to this? Is this, I know there's a big rally tomorrow. Let's timestamp this. It's 10:47 in the morning on Friday. You have a big rally tomorrow. How well attended do you think it's going to be, and what's the response from your fellow students? And also, has there been pushback from any students on campus too? If you could address that, I'd be grateful.
Mm-hmm. We're overwhelmed by the response we've been getting. I'd say I didn't really expect it to be at this level, but students are fed up. They're saying enough is enough. And I think it's mainly because of control. Some students maybe already have the 3 doses or will choose to wear a mask, but the fact that we're getting new conditions on how to live freely and how to live our lives and how to resume normalcy, again, you know, almost this will be going into our 3rd year of this pandemic. Students are done with that. And, you know, we've had a bit of there's been a few comments, of course, of people who don't agree. And, you know, we encourage those discussions to happen. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we need to reestablish choice and just be united, because the university has been trying to divide us for the last 2.5 years.
Do they ever? And so is the Prime Minister, as you well know. Let me ask you this: what's your bottom line? So you're mad. You don't want to do this. What are you looking for? You're for a rescinding of the policy. If they don't rescind, what will you do? Are you guys prepared to not go to school this year? What's your bottom line?
For the group, our bottom line is ending all the mandates. You know, they can roll it back similar to how other universities are, bringing back the choice, encouraging people to perhaps get the vaccine, making vaccines available to students who want it. Sure, go for it. That makes sense. You know, and obviously being respectful of who wants to wear a mask and who doesn't. I think we're all good with accepting those terms. You know, that's a normal common sense world that I think we'd all like to get back to. But our goal is ending all the mandates at Western. And we are prepared to keep going. We're prepared to demonstrate more. We're prepared for mass non-compliance. And I think a lot of students are prepared too by the messages I've been getting.
And do you think it's a majority?
I think it really could be. That's what the University Student Council right now is trying to determine. They're going to be opening up consultations with students directly through their counselors to make sure that no outside information is sort of getting in and fair enough to them. But I think that they're going to find it's a majority. Absolutely.
And what will you do if they don't do it? Then what? What if they say we're holding firm? Then what?
As the group, mass noncompliance. I had a lot of messages, a lot of other student groups similar to ours who are willing to join in, perhaps do national walkouts. So it's not going to be going away anytime soon, as much as they might want to ignore us.
So will you, just to be clear, mass noncompliance is an interesting idea. You know, maybe the Prime Minister will declare the Emergencies Act on your campus and send in the cops. Well, I mean, that's what they do, right? They dig in. You know, that is the problem here. They keep digging in deeper and deeper instead of recognizing that something has gone wrong. And I worry about that. But will you try to go onto the campus and go to school when school starts being unvetted? And what if they have security guards, let's say, for instance? I mean, that would be a terrible public relations disaster for them. But, you know, so is the Emergencies Act, and they got away with it. Next thing you know, they'll be calling you white supremacists or something to justify it, right? That's kind of what they do. But what are you, how much risk, I guess, are you prepared to take in this kind of, it really is civil disobedience, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You do.
Definitely. I would say that I haven't really thought through what I'm going to do personally yet, because I've been really wrapped up in what we've been doing recently with the group and looking out for students as a whole.
Yeah.
But we're gonna put a lot on the table, and it's not going to be going away anytime soon. Yeah.
Are you scared?
No.
No. How come?
I would say, well, as you're saying, the public relations sort of side of things, last year they forcibly removed a student from class who was being peacefully non-compliant. They carried him out of class. I believe that happened twice, Harry. And so unless they're looking to hire many more security guards and do that on a large scale, they're not going to succeed in silencing the non-compliance and the civil disobedience there.
Okay, so tell me about what's happening tomorrow. It's a big, is it a demonstration? Is that the correct word to use about it?
Yeah, I would say rally or demonstration.
Rally, okay, yeah.
Either works, but yeah, we're going to be meeting on Concrete Beach, which is in between the University Community Center and the Walden Library. It's a pretty central spot on campus. We're going to be having some speakers come in, some student speakers and outside experts and faculty members. And then moving beyond that, we are planning on having a march on campus, but we are still coordinating that with campus police.
Okay, and what time is the demo?
It starts at 12 p.m.
At 12 p.m. Okay, and what's the name of your organization?
We are Enough is Enough Western.
And tell me your social media addresses quickly.
Oh, we're at Students Number 4 Agency on both Twitter and Instagram.
Okay. Now, Julie Panesi, I know, is speaking tomorrow, but she sent me a note to read to you. It says, students, you have been deceived, coerced, and bullied for 2 years by the people who are supposed to teach you not what to think, but how to think, how to demand evidence, how to make decisions for yourself. Now you are being ambushed by an administration that is imposing an unscientific mandate without offering evidence and within days of the start of class. But you have so much more power than you realize. You're in control, not the university. This will go on for exactly as long as you remain silent. It will stop the moment you say no. You are rising up. Canada's eyes are on you. Now is your moment. So, Bruce, did you want to say goodbye to Kendra? Do you want to have the last word with her?
Oh, well, sure. Kendra, very well done. I wish you luck tomorrow and in the days and weeks to come. I hope you are triumphant. I think Julie is absolutely correct. You actually do have the power in your hands. The students collectively do. So if a significant portion, a critical mass of students at Western just said, you know what, no, this would have to end. The university could not afford to carry it on. So I think you're on the right path, and very well done.
Thank you. We'll hopefully keep it going.
Thanks, Kendra. Good luck, and we'll be in touch about getting you to do a show at some point in the future. Okay.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, thanks, honey. Bye. So, hi, Bruce. How are you?
Hi, Trish. I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I feel that this generation is finally redeeming itself.
Yeah, it's been a long haul and a difficult couple of years for them, for sure.
Yeah.
They have become the sacrificial lambs, yeah, at this moment, and there, of course, there have been exceptions. There have been extraordinary people who stepped out and been willing to take the brunt of disapproval and sanction and so on. And I'm glad to see that more now are sort of waking up to what the situation is. And we'll have to see what happens from here. But it's a very interesting moment in all kinds of ways.
Well, it is interesting. And, I don't mean to sort of hammer on the kids for not being more active sooner. But my question about social media it's actually a big one, because I do feel on a whole bunch of fronts right now where there seems to be a lack of critical thinking, that it's in younger people. And one of the big differences between them and people my age, I think, is their use and reliance on curated social media feeds. I think they're very, very dangerous in the sense that I think it impedes critical thinking if the only things you're seeing all day are things you've curated because of your confirmation bias.
Well, that may well be so. And there's also the factor that social media accentuates the importance of approval and the sting of disapproval. And so it might be harder for this generation to step out of line, so to speak.
Yes.
And risk that, social disapprobation. But for whatever reason, and listen, to give them the benefit of the doubt as well. I mean, the bad thinking that's occurred in the past couple of years has not been of their making. It's been the older generation that has imposed it upon them. Now, yes, for the most part, until recently, the mass of them haven't pushed back. But I mean, the poor thinking, the lack of critical thinking that you're alluding to, originates in an older generation, which is not quite so sunk into social media, I would have thought. And so that's a bit of a puzzle as well.
Yes, it is. It is. And that, I think there's a political divide on some of this stuff too. Obviously, the profs at a university are going to be on the left politically, most of them, not all, but many. And that means that they're buying into the narrative. I mean, it's just, it's really, really frustrating. Did you see Tucker Carlson last night?
Last night I did not know.
Oh, well, he did something really interesting. He cited a Democrat report that is now blaming Trump for all the vaccine issues.
Right. I did hear about that.
Yeah, yes. And it's actually quite interesting, because what it means is that the left, which has been kind of blindly, I don't mean everybody, but which has kind of blindly been supporting vaccines despite all of the safety signals and the other things that have been happening, now have a legitimate way to back away from it if they can blame Trump. So I thought maybe that's actually going to change things. It gives them an out now, right?
Well, yes, it does. And that itself is one important indication, not the only one, but perhaps an important one, that this might soon be over, at least not in the broad sense, but in the immediate COVID mandate sense. If they are now blaming Trump for the vaccines, a thing which they have steadfastly insisted upon up until now, then that might be an indication of something for sure. But we should just acknowledge that in a way, COVID has been a perfect woke storm, because it has fed all their inclinations, fed all of their fantasies about centralized control and telling people what to do, and making rules in collective interests and excluding the interest of the individual, and a whole bunch of other features that woke philosophy likes to promote. And so it all came together in a package, if you like. And then once they were in it, they were determined not to get out of it. And I think that's partly what's still happening now. Now, as we know, many universities haven't done the same thing as Western has done. There's no booster mandate at most of Ontario universities today, which is great. But still, the Western thing, and there are still other things hanging around that are remnants of a desire to carry on the show that they've been on these past couple of years.
Yeah, well, I know U of T is doing it for students
For
and
residents
too,
right.
and there may have been something at Trent. I wasn't able to get to the bottom of it, but it kind of surfaced in my research this morning. The other angle of this, besides the politics of it, which has been obvious almost from the beginning, from those early press conferences at the White House, the White House press conferences with Fauci and Trump, and you could see the media animus for Trump. No matter what he did, it was wrong. It was pretty clear it was politicized. But I think what's really bothering me about the Western situation is the idea that learned people, in order to assuage their own anxiety, are using kids as human shields, when we know some kids at Western who take a booster in order to go to school, if there are enough of them, will get myocarditis. It will just happen. That's not, given the numbers, that is what's going to happen. We can predict that. So if the teachers know that and they're pushing this anyway for their own selfishness, that's terrible. And if they don't know that, it's also terrible that they don't. I mean, there's no winning formula here for what they're doing. And I have to say, as a parent, I am quite shaken by the fact that the faculty at Western would be demanding such an absurd and dangerous thing.
Yes. Well, let's just contrast for a moment the situation last year and the one this year. Now, in my view, the situation last year was also wrong. I mean, if you look at this through any of three lenses, the medical scientific lens, an ethical lens, or a legal lens, in my opinion, last year's rules were all wrong. But they're even more wrong now, because if you look at through any of those three lenses today, the situation is actually much clearer in all those senses.
Yes.
As you allude to, we now have acknowledgement even from the Chief Medical Officer of Health of Ontario, who last year was putting in, vaccine passports and mandates and so on, now has said that this should be an individual assessment of risk and benefit. And he has acknowledged the myocarditis risk for young people, especially males, as you alluded to. And he says that the choice should be an individual one. I mean, that was not the case last year. And so the university this year, Western, unlike last year when the universities were hiding behind the directives that were being produced by both the provincial government and the local health authorities, this year they're on their own, because the province has not given them directives in a similar way this year. Last year, they were required to have a vaccination policy. Now, that didn't mean that the vaccination had to be mandatory, but they at least had instructions. This year, that's not the case. And so there's nothing to hide behind this time. They've tried to hide behind local health recommendations, but those recommendations do not recommend a mandatory booster for young people. They just don't. And so that's a bit of a pretend. So the university stepped out in this situation, unlike last year. And legally, they're also on shakier ground, because the prohibition against collecting personal medical information that was in place and still is in place. But if you'd asked this question in 2019, can the university demand of its students that students, supply the university with its medical records? The answer would have been obviously no. But then last year happened, and the province enacted statutes and they issued directives, and suddenly, that was very much in question. But now they've backed off, the province has. And now you'd think that with respect to their ability to demand personal medical information, we'd be back now to the 2019 situation. And so there are more things now for Western to worry about legally than probably there was last year.
Well, that's interesting, because my next question was, is there some legal exposure? And I'm wondering, just to follow the logic of that question, if a kid is coerced by the school, let's say they've been granted admission to study there this year, then they find out, they can't go to another school now, it's too late. They find out this is coercion, there's no question about that. And they take the shot, they take the booster shot, and they get a heart issue as a result of that. Is there exposure legally on behalf of Western University?
Well, that question's not quite so clear, because I think the argument will be that it's actually not coercion in the unlawful sense. Sure, there's a coercive aspect to it, no question about it. When the government says you will do this or we will fine you or put you in jail, that's coercion. But when you're dealing with a contractual matter, just because someone sort of has you in a difficult spot in terms of negotiation. I mean, if you go to buy a bike and the person won't sell the bike for the price that you want, we're not going to call that coercion, because that's a matter of bargaining. And so in this situation, which can also be framed as a contractual question, the matter will be whether or not there has been reliance upon the university's representations before the booster mandate was announced, whether or not that would maintain some kind of a claim in the case of a student who would not otherwise have gotten a booster but was persuaded to do so because of the difficult situation they're now in. I'm not sure that's quite so straightforward.
But how about this then? What about the idea that it looks like in the announcement of the booster shot that they are downplaying the risks to the students? They're like, some parent may look at that and say, well, obviously if Western, which has, medical credentials and science credentials, is suggesting a booster, it can't be dangerous for my kid then. And saying we're relying on this scientific evidence that it's fine. They're giving an undertaking, aren't they, to try to compel kids?
Perhaps, and there is a risk there for them. It's true, but the medical transaction, though, is not between the university and the student. It's between the student and the healthcare practitioner at the place where they go to get the booster if they decide to do so. So when they walk into the clinic or the doctor's office, that's the moment where they're supposed to be informed about the risks, and they're supposed to give their informed consent. And if they receive no information that there is any risk, then arguably there's a lack of informed consent, and then there might be a cause of action in the case of an injury against the practitioner who was negligent in not informing them about what the situation was. But it's a bit more difficult to reach back and get the institution for that, because the institution is not really in the business of providing that information for the purpose of forming the consent. So in a sense, the university is fobbing off the responsibility, or trying to the vaccinator, who will hold most of the responsibility. So this is a very perilous time, I would think, for someone to be doing vaccinations in a clinic or an office, especially to young people, because there has now been established to be a statistical risk, as you were alluding to earlier, of conditions like myocarditis. And in a population as large as the student population at Western, statistically, if that whole population got boosted, then statistically you would expect a certain number of people to suffer that side effect. And so that's a bad scene.
Well, they also apparently in one of the things I read of theirs, they also have a vaccine clinic too, so they may have some liability on that side of it, right?
Sure. Yes.
Boy, I wouldn't be doing that if I was a university right now. I would not be having a vaccine clinic on campus. There is no way. I think they have a law school there, don't they? I don't know.
I went to that law school.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Yeah.
so you'd think that the head of the law school would be saying, "Whoa, this is not." I feel. You know what I feel like? I feel like everybody's gone crazy.
Yes. And one aspect that I'd like to return to is the one that you spoke about earlier, which is that this really is an instance of an older generation sacrificing the interest of a younger generation to protect themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not news now that COVID is most dangerous to old people, especially old people with comorbidities, and that it presents very low risk to healthy young people. And the profile of the vaccine, if I understand correctly, is almost the reverse.
Yep.
Right. And so
Yep.
what the older folks are saying is, look, I'm scared. And so we're going to make a vaccine, even though there's really no benefit to you and there is some risk. I mean, that's outrageous.
It is outrageous, and it makes me think very, very poorly of these people. Like I alluded to before, if they are making this demand of the students that they're going to be teaching, they should know what the science actually says. And if they know what the science says and they're doing it anyway, they're making these kids take a risk, that's terrible. If they don't know, it's also terrible. There's no philosophical or moral argument they could be making right now. And we saw this too in a big way with especially the American teachers unions, but also here in Ontario, where the teachers were demanding these absolutely heinous school closures that have ruined almost a generation of children. I don't know if you've talked to Irvin Student about this, but it's terrifying what's happened.
Right.
And the kids had little risk. And my question, if the teachers are that scared and the profs are that scared, they can teach remotely, let the kids go to school. If they want to appear on a Zoom screen in the lecture hall, that's cool. You'll look like a fool, but, do that, right? And you can put your mask on alone in your tenure paid for house and be all afraid while the kids go to school. But the idea that you have to either vaccinate kids or keep them from school in order to keep the teachers safe it's a completely upside down way of looking at this process.
Yes, no question. And in some ways, as you were speaking to Kendra about, this is an eye opener about our institutions and the state that they are in. And this may get a lot of people thinking twice about their assumptions about the value, number one, of a university education, about the ability of very learned people to reason and to consider data and to be unemotional in their thinking process. I mean, all those things are now in question.
Yeah.
And if I was a young person, I would wonder what I was getting, and other than a credential. This really does bring into question the substance of the stuff behind the credential. And the universities have been taking a big risk in this period to push so far as to potentially make people question the assumptions about their value. Mm-hmm. I mean, they did it last year too. When you put all as an institution, if you say, well, it's okay, we can put everything online. All the students can be online. All the professors can be online. It's fine. We're going to charge you the same tuition because it's equivalent. Well, hold on. If you can do it that year, why can't you do it permanently? And if you can do it permanently, then why is it so expensive? And so on and so forth. It's a bit of a domino effect. Yes. If the more compromises you make, the more you insist the compromises make no difference, the more the questions come, like, well, then what are we doing here?
Well, it's like the work from home thing too. These incremental things that they justified because out of fear they wanted to do extreme things that were at the end of the day virtually useless in preventing the spread. That's my view. Mm-hmm. So they incrementally, now people don't want to go back to work. They're like, well, if I can do the same work at home, patting my dog and bouncing my baby on my knee, why the hell would I park $40 a day to work at the TD building downtown? So that's what they've done. They've created all of this new world that none of us like very much, right? Because they were dishonest in their response to the virus. And I think one of the biggest dangers that's come out of the last 2.5 years for all of us is the idea that Zoom is real life. Jennifer Say, the person who used to be a big executive at Levi's and quit so she could continue her advocacy for children not being locked out of school. She turned down $1 million paycheck to do that. This is her mantra, and I agree with her. Zoom is not real life. Zoom does not take the place of an AA meeting or church or school or any of the things we need to be healthy human beings. And I think they've opened a real slippery slope now where collective humanity has been devalued by the Zoom platform, and they went along with it for selfish reasons, and now they can't get out of it. Right?
Sure, that could all be true, but let's take a bit of a darker view of this. Sure. This just might be in the next step in our social evolution, working towards a virtual kind of permanent reality, right? Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the next logical step along the way. People who spend all their time on social media and get all their social interactions from social media, it would make sense in a way, in a twisted kind of dark way, that we would end up living online, quite literally. And it might get worse in the future as we all sort of descend into virtual reality and Meta and all of these new platforms where you can actually have a virtual life that's not your real life, but you spend most of your time in there and concerned about that kind of life that you have, and you lose your grip on reality.
Well, I do spend some time banging on about that very idea. I think you're completely right to hypothesize that, because what COVID has really put into stark relief is the idea that our kind of the I'll call them the elites. They're not necessarily elite, but let's just use that word, devalue human connection. Huh. And I talked to Scott Atlas a few times, really like him. And he said that during the COVID meetings, the White House COVID meetings with Fauci and Birx, Fauci's now denying he asked to lock down the documents that he was signing off on. I've seen him. That's an absolute lie. She's saying, I never thought the vaccines would prevent, transmission. So they're all heading for the hills now, right? But what Scott said about them, and this really hit home with me, is that they did not discuss collateral damage. They did not discuss how isolation drives people to suicide. They just didn't talk about it. And did they not talk about it because they don't understand it, or because the focus on the virus was so extreme that nothing else mattered? I don't know. But that the idea now has been pushed forward and indeed embraced by governments that we don't need each other anymore as human beings. And that really scares me.
Right. Well, can we just circle back for a moment, though, to a very basic point that's been made over and over again, and I think is so well established in the scientific literature now that nobody contests it, or nobody reasonable, which is that the vaccines do not prevent infection, and do not even hinder infection compared to an unvaccinated person. And yet the whole rationale behind a booster mandate at a university, even if it's to protect the old people, is that the booster does prevent infection. And so even if you ignored the ethical problem, even if you ignored the legal problem, the medical rationale for having a booster mandate at a university just doesn't exist. Even the people who are pushing mandates and passports, the government, for example, admits that the rationale for mandates and passports is to create an incentive for people to get the vaccine so that they won't get severe symptoms. Now, even that's in question, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt for a moment. Let's assume for a moment that having the vaccine, if you are a vulnerable person, might possibly mean that you get less severe symptoms than without it. I'm not sure that's true, but let's just go with that for a moment. If that's true, it still doesn't make a booster mandate at a university make sense. It doesn't make any sense. Those people who are scared about catching COVID will not be protected in any way by having all the kids in the classroom vaccinated. It makes no difference. And so it's a kind of, as you were alluding to earlier, it's a kind of collective psychosis or insanity. It's an inability to see that the things you're grasping at actually don't relate to the fear that you're carrying.
Well, what they've added into the mix now, I've been following the rhetoric, obviously, for a very long time. And so now I think Fauci may have introduced it. If not, it was Rochelle Walensky at CDC. They use this phrase layer of protection, which kind of means, well, it doesn't actually work, but why not try it anyway? So the masks are a layer of protection for a vaccine that isn't stopping transmission. And the vaccine is a layer of protection for masks that don't work. And that's the language they use. And like the university did in justifying these mandates, it was talking, well, this is we want to have a safe campus. What does that mean, right? So you're quite right. Like if you say to one of these people who think that vaccinating the kids is going to protect them, and you say, well, it doesn't prevent transmission, and then their comeback will be the Fauci comeback. Well, it does keep people out of the hospital and prevent severe disease. Right. So you just answered your own argument, right? If it's there to protect you from getting severe disease, why do the young people, the young students have to take it? It's their argument is so easily knocked down by any thinking person that you can't even believe that they're still making it, and yet they are collectively.
Yes, that's right. And that means that this whole thing is actually not about any of that. It's about the ability to tell people what to do. It feeds into a political inclination to demand the things in the collective good, even when the collective good might not exist. If you resist the directive to act in the way that you are told when it's represented to be in the collective interest, then you're the bad guy, even if it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's an exercise of power.
It is. And you know what I've seen emerging also, this is another bit a rhetorical flourish, and that is the idea of taking one for the team. The super heavy duty vaxxed people who are coming down with COVID over and over and over again, including our prime minister, will say, well, it's a matter of public health, and now they cannot deny that vaccines are harming people. We are paying out settlements to people who were vaccine injured. Workmen's compensation in Ontario has paid out money to people. So if we're recognizing that they cause a problem, then the only argument is, well, you have to accept that risk for the greater good. So it's gone from safe and effective, where are you being a weirdo and worrying about it, to, well, they're not safe and effective, but that's what you do to be a good citizen. That is now where we are in the argument.
That's correct. Exactly so. But this is really the theme. This is the central proposition in an ideological sense. If you are on a particular ideological team, you want that to be enough to make people do things even when it's not in their own interests. And when people resist and say, well, that doesn't make sense, the response is hostile, because you're challenging the premise of the whole agenda. I know that sounds absurd to people who believe in, individual autonomy and the rule of law and scientific rationality, but we've sort of crossed over in this COVID era to a degree of irrational centralized control. And it is that centralized control that is at stake. So what we have here in COVID is an ideological opportunity for those who are in favor of establishing centralized control of a society and an economy. They've jumped all over it. And this is what has happened. And those people who object to these measures on very logical, scientific, self-interested grounds are threatening the premise of that program. And the people who promoted these things are stuck now, because the measures are contingent upon the sensibility of the COVID rules, and those COVID rules don't make any sense. So the project of centralized control is under threat, and those people who refuse to go along with it are posing an ideological challenge. And that's the fight that's really going on now, I think. It's hard to maintain the idea that this is really still about the virus or about the vaccine. It's really about the ideology.
Well, and I think the fact that Democrats are jumping ship and now blaming Trump for something that they claimed. I wrote a Substack about this. I don't know if you've been following it closely, but when Trump announced the vaccine, I was horrified that they were going to try to speed up that, because I was a science reporter and I understand how long it takes to run proper clinical trials, especially on safety. But I thought, okay, well, they believe everybody's going to die, so, do it, right? Mm-hmm. But what happened was the Democrats who believed in the Democrats, or who were, let's say, people who hated Trump, let's put it that way, were saying, I'm not taking that. Anything that comes from the Trump presidency, that vaccine, that's not being tested long enough. They made all these really, really good arguments, actually, aside from the personal enmity. Then what happened? Albert Bourla withheld the release of the vaccine until 5 days after Biden was elected, so that it became Biden's vaccine. And Biden, who personally had done nothing but shit on the vaccine for months, including during the political campaign, is now all of a sudden its biggest, pardon the expression, booster, and the left embraced it as if it was a magical elixir from the gods, right? Yes. And only because of the time when it was actually announced. I believe, and somebody can prove me wrong, that Bourla did that on purpose. And I'll tell you why I think it was really clever. Withholding the announcement, if Trump won, Trump would still get credit and he wouldn't be mad. Giving Trump a win would mean that the Democrats would be upset with him, right? And or giving Trump credit, and the Democrats winning means the Democrats would be upset with the Pfizer vaccine. So there was no downside for Pfizer not giving Trump the win. There was a downside by giving Trump the victory, right? So the minute that they gave Biden the victory by withholding, all of a sudden, it was the next greatest thing to slice bread. Now that the vaccines are obviously failing in both efficacy and safety, they're back to saying it's Trump's vaccine. I mean, it's absolutely breathtaking.
Yes, but there is a distraction here, especially for even for the side which is skeptical about the vaccines. Yeah, which is this: there is so much information now that the vaccines are not effective and are risky, that the attention is about the vaccines. But it's easy to forget this, that if the vaccines had worked and if they had been safe, the mandate still would have been wrong. I mean, the appropriateness of a mandate does not depend upon whether or not the medication works or not. It's medication, and medication is a personal choice. And so it's become easier to make the case against the vaccines because the vaccines are gathering such a poor record. But it's also a little dangerous because people begin to think that the reason that the mandates were wrong is because the vaccines stink. That's actually not the reason. If the vaccines didn't stink, the mandates would still be wrong because you're taking medical choices out of the hands of individuals.
But would you say that about, say, smallpox? What are the ones that aren't certain vaccines, polio, mandated for school children?
Well, they are and they're not. I mean, they appear to be, but like the COVID vaccination requirements, in Ontario, for example, the vaccination requirements for school kids include an out for the parents on medical grounds, religious grounds, or conscience grounds. So if you don't want your child to have a vaccine that's otherwise required, then all you need to do is attest to the fact that you don't want them to have it on your conscience. And then that's fine. So it appears to be a requirement, but it's actually not in the same way that these COVID vaccinations happen.
Let me ask you this kind of in closing. Where do you think we are headed? I have said prematurely on this show many times that we've passed the tipping point, and then boom, Western happens, and I feel like we've made no progress at all. I mean, given that this actually seems not to be about COVID, but about something else, are we ever going to be out of the woods?
I don't know, but I wouldn't put money on it. There are certain things that might come to be the flavor of the day in the near future once the particular issue of these COVID vaccines maybe starts to fade away. I mean, there might be a new vaccine, there might be a new variant, there might be a new cause or an old cause like climate change. But here's what's going to remain. There's going to remain a desire and an impetus to carry on the same kind of discretionary, technocratic control or ability to control a population in the name of the latest emergency situation, because that's what they crave. They crave centralized control, and whatever emergency you can think of will do in order to maintain the legitimacy of that project. And so I do think that COVID itself, at least in its present iteration, is going to fade away, but I don't think that's going to mean that there's an end to the problem.
How do we stop electing these people? I mean, how do we, it's so interesting because it's so clearly, obviously true that they are not governing to represent the will of the people, right? They have their own agenda. We know that now. How do we get rid of them? Like I said once, I'm not voting for anybody who keeps us in the World Economic Forum. That sounds really silly, or G7. I don't want those guys anymore.
But it's not even.
Let's make that an issue.
It's not. I don't think it's even a question of who we elect and who we have to choose from. I mean, even if you had a different roster of politicians, you wouldn't change the profile, the trend, the arc of the managerial state, and that's what we have. We've had for a long time. Yeah. This is not. The problem that we're in now is not just a COVID thing. It seems to have sort of arisen suddenly in the past 2 years, and no doubt about it that COVID has brought it on hard. Yeah. But this has been in the works for decades, and it's a problem in our governance systems. It's a problem in our legal system. It's a problem in our cultural beliefs. This has been a trend, and I don't think simply having a different election with different politicians is going to fix it. I mean, Trump was elected in the U.S. at a particular moment in time, and he said, "I'm going to get rid of the deep state," and I think his instinct about that is pretty good, but you can see how hard it is to do, because it's a juggernaut with its own momentum. And it's not just one thing. It's not just bureaucrats sitting in offices. It's the idea. The most important thing is the idea that people have in their heads that government is benevolent and acts in their interests. And the more government we have, the better. And the more things they do for us, the better. In order to turn this ship around, that idea has to go.
Well, I completely agree with that. It scares me. I've said before on the show that I was doing some research into under what circumstances academia accepts authoritarianism. And I found a lot of writing kind of around 2012, 2014, coming out of academic journals that suggested that authoritarian governments are pretty good now because of climate change. We need that because the population is so dumb. And we want to have our big cars and whatever. And so we've got to be authoritarian to save the planet. And I think that the idea of creating existential threat after existential threat, in their words, not mine, is a way for them to justify tyrannical governance ideas, right? That we're smart, they're dumb, we're going to make these decisions, and if they don't like it, too bad, we're saving the world, and they're just a bunch of idiots. And I feel very strongly that's what's happening.
This is a genuine belief held by a lot of academics, not all of them by any means. I mean, the academics are individuals too, but there's a very large portion of academics who genuinely believe in what you've just said, which is that people are too stupid to do things on their own, and they have to be guided by us. We are there for that purpose. I mean, just imagine in certain fields, the purpose of scholars is to figure out the thing for the rest of us to do. And if that was not their function, they would be without purpose. Yeah. And so I have had conversations with colleagues in the hallways of conferences who have said to me, you don't really think that people should be left alone to do their own thing, do you? I mean, and they're genuine about it. They're completely believe that that's a crazy idea.
Yeah, well, that's very disheartening, isn't it? I mean, but I do believe it's true now, and it must be driving them crazy that the truckers, these blue-collar people, have been right about vaccines and were able to bring the country together in ways that they can't with their kind of fancy, academic degrees and stuff. It must have been a real punch in the nose for a lot of the elite class to see, and of course that's why they had to be canceled and smeared immediately. But it was joyful in the moment, wasn't it?
Oh, indeed it was. It was, and joyful is the word for it. I mean, on the scene, it was a celebration more than anything else. And yes, its occurrence was a threat to the established order, if you want, we should like to put it that way. Yeah. And I think that's probably why the government concluded that it amounted to an emergency. It was an emergency for them. It was an ideological emergency.
Yes,
but it wasn't, of course, one in the sense of the Emergencies Act. But nevertheless, I could understand why they were alarmed.
Well, me too. I have said this before, but imagine how they thought they were just a bunch of weirdos coming in trucks, and then as it grew, even in the snow, half the country was out on those highways, and nuns and Mennonites and all the wonderful different people out there cheering and smiling and crying with joy. I mean, and not to mention the money they raised, which was huge, Yes. So they were a real threat to the ideology, and the fact that they weren't violent and weren't all of the things they tried to smear them with was very threatening for them. What cowards they were and how they dealt with it. All he had to do was come out and talk to them.
But that would have given them legitimacy, and that's the one thing that they probably thought they couldn't do.
Yeah, brutal. Last thought from you about these wonderful kids at Western. What do you say to them?
Oh well,
Bruce?
I listen. At the end of the day,
yeah,
they have, in a sense, already won. Because they're the ones who are going to be able to look at themselves in the mirror for the rest of their lives and say, no, I wasn't one of the ones who was pushed around, who just went along and did what I was told. You need to establish that kind of integrity to yourself, first of all. You owe it to yourself to make your own decisions, especially your own medical decisions, and have a great deal of respect for these kids who have stepped out now. This is their moment. This is a very important moment in their lives. Yep. It could have health ramifications for them, but even if it doesn't, I mean, it's important because this is the moment where they figure out whether or not they're going to be a member of the herd or whether or not they're going to think for themselves.
Well, it's kind of been an interesting Vietnam War parallel, because the Vietnam War was less interesting to young people until they implemented the draft, right? And then everybody pretty quickly. And they were right to fight. It was a terribly misbegotten war, as we all know now. And I think that the mandates are kind of like the draft was back then. It's gotten them focused pretty quickly, right? All of a sudden, they're looking at studies the way that young people were looking at foreign policy back in the 60s and 70s,
Yes. And this generation, for the most part, has not been nearly as rebellious against authority as previous generations have been. And who knows, maybe this will be the moment where they decide, actually, you know what, this is not all in our interests, and we should raise a ruckus like some earlier generations have done about the issues of the day. Yeah,
wouldn't it be great? I'd love that. And she seems wonderful, so that's really brightened my day, even though I'm down that tenured profs could use these kids as human shields. I will never, as long as I live, ever forget this moment, because it's so selfish and so it's just inhumane. It's not even the science around it. It's like if somebody said to me, okay, Trish, you have to take a risk in order to save 5 20-year-olds who might be in trouble if you don't. I would take that risk. What person doesn't take that at risk. This is why I don't understand old people hanging the youth out to dry with lockdowns and vaccines and all the things that have been so hard on them. I just don't understand it. Maybe I'm different. I'm not particularly heroic. I just think that's the way it should be. Let them have their lives.
Yeah, I do. And I do agree. And, the best that can be said about all of this is that it is revealing. It's revealing. You show your true self at moments like this.
Don't you, though?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, Bruce. Well, thanks for doing this. And I'm glad you're at a cottage decompressing a little bit. I just came back from hours after only 10 days. But I felt sort of refreshed by it. Being near the water is always good for me.
It's always great. Always good. Yes. And thanks for the conversation, Trish. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I'll be seeing you soon, I understand.
That's
so
right.
We'll talk more then. Okay, Bruce.
Care.
Thank you. Bye. So that was a Bruce Pardy, and prior to that we heard from Kendra Hancock, one of the students who is leading the protests at Western U. So go, Kendra. Totally restored my faith in young people. It was really great. I want to just end the show with the words of Matt Strauss, who is a very bold guy. He is the acting medical officer of health and at Haldeman, Norfolk, I think it's called, Health Unit. He's been an outspoken and thoughtful critic of lots of the what they call NPIs, which is the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And he was one of the early people to speak out. I want you guys to remember this is really important, both when you're deciding who to fund, like me, and who to listen to, like Matt. It's really easy now for people to be coming out with their criticisms. And I applaud that, because only when the voices get louder and louder will we stop this from happening again. But do please remember those of us like Matt, like myself, like Jay Bhattacharya, like Chris Milburn, like all of the people who actually were doing the research, making the warning, saying publicly the criticisms that we are now learning were absolutely true. So the difference is that those of us who did it early on were taking a risk. I started this podcast in a large sense to deal as a science journalist with what I was seeing as a nonsensical and dangerous approach to COVID-19. And it's been a totally new career trajectory for me. It's fine. I love it. I started in radio, so this is really natural for me. But normally right now I would be out doing documentaries, TV and streamer documentaries. But I'm doing this now and I love it. But please take a minute to think about the people who went first here and understand that the next bad thing coming down the pike, you're likely not going to hear it from the big guys who are now picking up on this. You're going to hear it from the independents who stuck their neck out. And one of them was Matt Strauss. Sorry, that sounded self-serving, but I just felt it needed to be said. So here's Matt Strauss. He did a wonderful Twitter thread about Western, which is his old med school. Here's what he says. Yesterday was demoralizing. Some of the best years of my life, 2004 to 2013, were med school, internal medicine residency, and ICU fellowship at Western. I still bleed purple. I guess that's the school color. This mandate will hurt people and threatens to ruin a very special place. Western claims to be enacting their 3-dose mandate after consultation with their experts. Which experts are these who do not seem to know that 3rd dose effectiveness is roughly 0 at 4 months? Well said. What sort of expert doubles down on the failed measures that spectacularly failed to contain Omicron just last fall? Here he's got a study that says Cornell's experience shows that traditional public health interventions were not a match for Omicron. That's on JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association. I know it well. It seems to me, says Matt Strauss, MD, that a clique of preening zealots who understand very little about the whole of human health have taken over my alma mater. They congratulate each other in an echo chamber and distribute dubious credentials in a daisy chain of obedience. Unencumbered by actual clinical experience, regard for the scientific evidence, or fealty to our standard ethics, they claim a mantle of unearned expertise, in quotation marks. If you have never had to tell someone, sorry, the hospital didn't let you visit your husband for the last 10 days because you traveled out of the country, he has died, you are not an expert in the harms of these policies. If you have never intubated someone who got COVID from their vaccinated and masked caregiver who did everything right, in quotes, you are not an expert in the failures of these policies. I spoke to the actual medical experts at Western today, my friends and former colleagues. They were, oddly, not consulted about this policy, and that is as I thought. That is as I thought, people. These kids about to start first year, whose futures you would casually foreclose upon with 2 weeks' notice, were 15 when this madness started. They didn't have dances, they didn't have sports, they didn't have the theater. They deserve to have college with smiles next week. Enough is enough. That is the hashtag of these kids and Matt Strauss. Please use it in your social media. Please stand up for these kids. It is time that we stand and not let this happen yet again. It should have happened 2 years ago. Day late and a dollar short, as my father would have said, but they're doing it now, and we have to stand. We have to stand with them. So let's do that. And as I said, if you're in the area, look up the Enough is Enough hashtag, find out exactly where they're meeting. I know Kendra spoke of it to confirm it, and go and support them and hear some great speakers, including Matt Strauss, who I admire very much, and Julie Panesi too. In the meantime, stay critical.